Hello. I'm going to talk about something that is affecting many people today, which is unemployment due to automation and what can be done about it. And I think this is a pretty big deal because no one has any really good answers for it. So I'm just going to explore it a little bit, and I think that there are a lot of extremely intelligent people in this room, and anyone who can help figure out how to fix this problem can both make a lot of money and make people's lives a lot better. So let's move along here. Anya, can you go next? So here we have the steam engine that was invented by Hero of Alexandria way back in 30 AD. And I put this up there because my point is people come up with awesome, great ideas, sometimes way ahead of their time. And the main limiting factor to coming up with ideas isn't doesn't have to do with developmentally predetermined things. I think that if they tried really hard, they could have actually done the Industrial Revolution back in antiquity. And that some people disagree with me, but I really think that there's a lot of examples like this in history. Can we go on to the next one? Here's another example, hot air balloons. The Romans had everything they needed to make hot air balloons. They had the textiles, they had the scale, they had it all, but they didn't think of it, they didn't make it. And if they had, the course of human history could have been significantly different. All right, next one. So here's an example. They had the capability to make huge, amazing projects. This Caligula, the emperor, created these ships that were practically like the size of temples. They had gardens, they had everything. They're the largest ships that were ever built. So they had the capability to do major things. Next. Here's another example, spectacles, 1300. It took them 300 years to go from lenses to telescopes. And it's similar for the microscope as well. There was no fundamental reason why they could not have used lenses maybe 100 years, 50 years, something after that to telescopes. And it would have completely changed the course of human history. But no one thought of it. That's really it. No one thought of it. No one experimented. It wasn't used. Next. Another example, microscope, 1690, penicillin, 1928. Almost 300 years, huge gap. You know, I know that it couldn't have been instantly after the invention of the microscope that they invented penicillin, but penicillin was invented by accident. Someone just found a fungus that was able to kill off bacteria. And as long as you have the microscope, that is the fundamentally enabling factor to figure it out. Next slide. Next. So Tyler Cohen came out with a thesis. He's an economist at GMU. He says average is over. He says economic growth and innovation since the 70s has been stagnating. And this contradicts a lot of the Kurzweil and other futurist rhetoric, which is that progress is accelerating and is continuing to accelerate. And initially, I dismissed a lot of this stuff. But one example is that real wages have stagnated since the 70s. And when Tyler Cohen, one of the things he argues is that more and more people are going to be eating beans and rice. It'll be like a century of beans and rice because we're losing productivity, we're losing real wages because there is some stagnation in innovation. So you look at, computers, the internet, and you might think, no, it's clear that innovation has not stagnated. But computing is one of the only areas where there has been major innovation in the last 20 or 30 years. In many other areas, there's not a lot of fundamental breakthroughs. Next slide. Here's the killer graph that I think impacts hundreds of millions of people's lives. The fact that productivity has been increasing continually throughout the century, but real wages have stagnated since 75. That's 40 years ago. Why aren't we getting richer? Well, part of it is the fact that it might have something to do with the ultra-rich. They have more effective means maybe of capturing the benefits of increased productivity for themselves and getting a lot richer and locking those off from other people so they don't have as much of an opportunity to benefit from them. But I think to some extent it's difficult to counteract this because in a free economy there's a limitation, there are limits to how much you can tax the rich to give to the poor essentially, and it doesn't really help the economic health in the long run to just try to grab money from the rich to give to the poor because usually they don't invest as well, which leads to less economic growth. In the end, they get screwed over anyway. If you look at the economic history of Russia, And Soviet Union, it was crappy. You know, initially they managed, but it was a collapse. And many American economists vastly overestimated the growth rates of the Soviet Union when it turned out they were just doing horribly. So the taking away money from the rich doesn't always work. We need to think more positive sum. Like, how can the average worker make more money? And it's not just through taxation. Next slide, please. Here is 99%. This is how people react. But this wasn't really successful. This did not significantly change legislation. It's just like an outburst of popular anger. Next slide. So how do the smarter people, like many of the people in this room who are educated and techies especially, how do we make money? One way that we can make money is by inventing games that cause people to sit around and do nothing, like Zynga, Farmville. You're making money off of other people's sloth and laziness. And they love that, you know, because they will be making like $250K a year or something like that off of making 1,000 moms in Kansas sit on their ass and play Farmville all the time. And you know, can you really tell the difference between like a super rich techie here that's making big bucks off of negative means like this, or can you go to the next slide? Or positive means, these guys, they're not making as much cash as those who are exploiting the laziness and mindlessness of human beings. These people are working with 3D printers. They're trying to make self-replicating 3D printers. This is something that could help people in a positive sum sense. It's not as glamorous, it's not as much money as the Zynga approach to technology, and they don't get thanks for it. Oftentimes, these people just do this as a hobby, essentially. They don't get any money off of it. They're barely making their expenses, but they're doing something that could change the entire economy in a way that's highly beneficial and put a lot more goods and all sorts of services into the hands of millions of people that would have otherwise not had. Next. So here's an argument in Washington Post, I think it was a few days ago, that we're doomed. Like, there aren't jobs being created at the same rate that they're being destroyed by technology. We are heading into a jobless future no matter what the government does. There's always like this conception that if we just pass the right legislation or if Congress does the right thing, then the economic issue will be fixed, we'll be all right. But it doesn't have to be like that. Maybe Congress can do whatever they want, the right thing, and we'll still be screwed because the economy just works like that. Next. So here we see labor force participation rate, who's working. There's a big uptick in the 80s when women got jobs for the most part. And then now, in the last 10, 20 years, it's not doing so well. It's going down. And, you know, it's not temporary. As far as we can tell, it's permanent. So there are millions and millions of people that are fresh out of school and they don't have anything to do. They're unemployed, they're highly skilled, and there's nothing they can do. They collect money or they mess around in like part-time jobs or not even. Next. So here's just, this was in, I think, the Washington Post about how it's interesting because this guy, he agrees with the vision of Peter Diamandis and Kurzweil that we'll have a rich future, but the fact that we will have a rich future does not necessarily mean that there will be work for everyone. Here at the bottom, he says, there won't be work for human beings. Self-driving cars will be available. They'll eliminate taxi, bus, etc. Drones will take the jobs of postmen and delivery people. That's just a tiny example. There's many, many sectors where automation, robotics will take away people's jobs, and they won't know what to do. Next. Here's what they'll do. They'll sit around. And, you know, for the first like month or so, few weeks, it's great to sit around and do nothing. Yay, you know? But when it's permanent, when your whole life ahead of you is this, it causes people to, you know, not be so happy. Next. Rightfully so. And here's the solution that is often floated. Like, if we give people money, if we tax the rich and give to the poor, even though they don't earn it, we're fixing the problem. It doesn't fix the problem because tons of studies have shown that people need employment to feel good about themselves. Makes sense, right? So when you give people money like this, it might exacerbate some of the really bad issues of people like in poverty, dying, starving, But it's a larger question, how do we give them self-worth? Next. So here's how people react. They see techies buying up property around here and that kind of thing, and they're freaking out. They're protesting Google buses. And a lot of it is they're unemployed, and they see these people making 100 to 200K a year, and they're not on board with this, and they're pissed off. Next. Same thing. Next. And Salon's writing articles in defense of this. This validates that whole behavior set of blocking Google buses, showing up at people's houses, and protesting them. Next. This. These people posted on Kevin Rose, who's, I forget what he is. I think he founded Dig. He's a tech dude. They posted this thing on the doors of all of his neighbors, calling him a parasite, saying that, oh, we like cook their meals and take care of their kids and all this stuff, but we get like nothing, and they're getting all the money. And they're going door to door and telling his neighbors that he's a parasite. And the same thing happened in Berkeley recently. Next. So here's what we got. 1848, the revolutions in Europe. This is what we're building closer and closer to. Because there's so many people, millions of people who do not have work, and techies are taking all the jobs, taking the economy, and people, they get pissed off, and we're slowly escalating towards this. If we do not figure out, we can go next, yeah. So, here we go. Robots are taking everyone's jobs. The operating cost of some robots is less than the salary of the average worker. As soon as that line is crossed, we're in danger zone. Next. What do we do with all these cheap humans? That is the question. That is the question of the next decade, 2 decades, 3 decades. We need to find ways for unskilled individuals to make money in a new economy that does not have a inherent landscape that is conducive to giving them a role. Next. This is a great talk. Marshall Brain on robotics and employment. It was given at Singularity Summit in 2008, I think it was. He summarizes the main issue. Robotics is killing employment. He wrote a book, it's online, called Robotic Nation, and addresses some of the major issues. And I knew he got some strong pushback from libertarians on this, because they, among libertarians is the notion that as long as we deregulate and favor free market, then everyone will have jobs. I strongly disagree. I do see the benefits of a free market, but there's no reason to assume that a free market has a place for everyone. Next. Here's a graph that has all the service jobs in each of these industries, and see millions. Many of these jobs will be replaced by AIs and robots in the next 20 years. Retail, trade, 14 million people unemployed. Management of companies, oh, that might stay because it's a really high IQ specialized area. Transport and warehousing, 3 million jobs gone. It's just a matter of time until these jobs are wiped out by automation. Next. Let's see. What if 50 million people become unemployed? That's what's going to happen in the long run. Next. Obviously, as robots reach parity with human intelligence, there's fewer jobs. Next. And on top of all this, it seems that there are some indications that technology and technological innovation in general is slowing down. It's not completely certain. Some people argue against this, but as I said earlier, I certainly think it's true that computing is the only area where there are major fundamental breakthroughs. In many other areas, they just don't have it. Next. So here's it's this combination of hope and excitement for this super high-tech future where we have robots and don't need to work, and we're Renaissance men, we're doing whatever we want. But it's a combination with this risk of all these jobs being lost. So it's, two sides of the same coin. Next. So here's my point. Rising unemployment due to automation is real. There doesn't have to be a solution. There's no reason that the universe needs to give us a solution. If the elites don't come up with a solution, then people are going to smash and grab. Smash and grab. It's worked since the beginning of time. It will work to temporarily solve the problem in the near term, if that's what people want. And it's a bad situation. So we need to come up with new ways. Next. So what can we do? What can we do to fix this? Maybe we could protect the service sector somehow. Maybe there can be a comeback of personal servants. Maybe there will be people that can afford that and can create jobs for individuals. Maybe we can figure out new things for people to do that they didn't do before. The economy has restructured itself in major ways in the past, partially due to technology, partially due to changing the way people think. Intentional self-sufficient agrarian communities, we'll talk about that in a second. Online learning. See, when you hear these futurists giving talks, oftentimes they present things like online learning as if like that'll solve it all. Like if we just have people in Khan Academy and things like that, then they'll be able to come up with, they'll gain new skills, they'll be employed, everything will be okay. But maybe not. Maybe people don't want to go to online colleges. Maybe they are bad at absorbing information that way. Maybe they want the old way. And there's letting people waste away with Second Life. Then developing new economic sectors entirely in design or bio, maybe it's possible. Maybe we can build interfaces that allow unskilled average human beings to somehow train AIs. That would be interesting, because maybe then almost anyone could become a programmer. Next. So this guy, Pistono, wrote, "Robots will steal your job, but that's okay." I haven't read the book. It's very short. At the end, most of the reviews said that he wasn't compelling. I don't think it's okay. We have not figured this out yet. Robots will steal our job, and it's not okay. Next. So there's this one economic model, which is to pack people into highly dense cities and hope that through the proximity and capital and all things like that, like all boats will rise. But places like New York City are the most unhappy city in the world, and I think like forcing people to work 60, 70 hours a week at a crappy job to make just enough to live might not be a great idea. Next. So here's a concept from the futurism of the early 90s and late 80s, edge cities, like the notion of maybe people need to move out of the cities. And this is somewhat happening now. Like there are people who couldn't continue to live in the Bay Area because of the dot-com boom. They moved back home. So they live like in places like suburbs. Maybe we can build large effective cities more by building suburbs, and that can take off some of the heat of the like rental market and other situations that make it so that people can't afford to live in good places and they can't find jobs because they're not skilled enough. Next. Here's an example from the Venus Project. Like I used to laugh at the Venus Project, but I'm starting to take them a little more seriously now. They create these nice like CG plans for automated like cities, intentional cities in the countryside, where everything it's a planned city. You can do things like create communal gardens in ways where it lets people live more easily and happily, because the capital for good living essentially is concentrated in one place. So maybe if people spend like 50% of their time farming their own food, they'll make it so that they can have a job. And their job is partially farming their own food, and the other half of the time, maybe the economy has enough. The main economy has enough like role for them to spend like 50% of their time, but not 100% of their time. Or maybe something can fit in this way. Next. Let's see. Here's another awesome thing: is the fact that solar cells are plummeting in price. So this makes it more easy to imagine people living in the countryside and contributing to the world information economy. You can live way out in the countryside, and if you have solar panels that keep your computer running, keep your fridge running, keep all your basics running, then you still get to enjoy sophisticated society, but you might live in the middle of nowhere. This might enable people to take advantage of the new economy more effectively. Next. Here's a cool house. It's called the $10,000 solar cabin. This guy Lamar Alexander created a whole ebook describing how to make it. For $10,000, someone can do this. So, and live somewhere in the countryside self-sustainably. This is really exciting and interesting that this is possible, and this is only possible now because of the fallen costs of solar panels. This was not possible 5-10 years ago. This is possible now. So the people, and it's interesting because I read the demands of the group of people that posted the parasite thing on Kevin Rose's house, and one of their demands was, let's give us all a bunch of land in the forest somewhere and enough money to create our own society. So maybe that's not so crazy. Maybe it's actually possible that people who are miserable in the cities now can do this, and maybe they won't have to slave away 60 hours a week at a crappy job. Next. Here's the bad scenario. Oculus Rift plus Second Life plus Soylent plus Depo-Provera. Like, this is how the elites will control the lower classes if there's no jobs for them and there's nowhere to put them. Give them food in the form of Soylent, make sure they don't make babies, hook them up to this Second Life virtual reality, and then pretty soon you have a dystopian scenario. Who really cares as long as they're not blocking our buses on the way to our tech job? They're out of our way. It's an appealing solution. Next. What? To some extent, yes. So, maybe VR isn't the end of the world. Maybe it's possible to use VR to teach people new jobs, new skills, or maybe there's a way to use VR where people can actually get physical activity at the same time as they're on the internet. This is kind of an interesting example. It's an omnidirectional treadmill with Oculus Rift. You can Google this, where you can walk in whatever direction you want in a virtual environment, so you're getting some exercise. And maybe this is where people should go to work, in this kind of a VR environment, and they'll perform tasks in that VR environment that have some informational value. Next. Here's another more futuristic version. Embryo selection for higher IQ kids. Maybe if we subsidize this kind of thing, then the average IQ will increase and there'll be more jobs for more people, and maybe we'll come up with enough jobs that a greater percentage of the population can use it. But the thing about these futuristic solutions is they aren't going to be available in the next 10, 20, maybe even 30 years for any significant percentage of the population. 30 years maybe. So at some point, eventually, there will be robots that are effective enough and AI that's effective enough that we really don't need to work because all of our needs are met. Like, that was my original, vision of the future, and I think it's a great vision of the future. But the question is, can we make it there in one piece? If we drop off and there's this, everyone's unemployed and everyone's freaking out and rebelling on the 20, 30, 40 years to that future, we won't make it there because society will collapse in the meanwhile. Next. Here's another drug that might boost IQ levels. We don't have any good drugs that boost IQ levels now. Maybe we will at some point. Next. There's another even more advanced possibility, which is what I call eugenics in a dish, which is essentially creating an embryo in a dish and creating and then taking those embryos, getting them to differentiate into sperm and eggs, then taking the sperm and eggs and combining them in a eugenic fashion to select for intelligence by sequencing the genome at each stage of the way. Maybe we could create super smart babies this way, but this isn't yet possible. It's another one of those 40, 50 years in the future type things, but it could solve everything as long as we make it to that stage. Next. So here's it. Instead of figuring out ways for people to be unproductive, like Zynga, figure out new ways for them to be productive. How do you make, see, most of the people in this room won't have issues with employment. Never will have issues with employment because we're all super smart, right? So what if we worry about the 100 IQ people instead of just ourselves? How do we create jobs for people who just have 100 IQ? Maybe we can also make a lot of money by figuring that out. But if we don't figure out something for them to do, they're just going to sit around. Next. And that's it.